Hey, welcome back. If you're just joining me, this is the other side of the family where I'm digging into my grandmother's Jamaican roots, one record, one name, one broken brick wall at a time. Okay, quick recap if you missed last time. In post 6, we followed the Blake family branch. This is my great-grandmother, Mabel Blake, her parents, James Blake, and Helen Lemona White, and the whole network of free colored landowning families in St. Elizabeth that this side of my tree comes out of. So in this episode, we're picking up a thread my dad handed me almost by accident, and it's going to take us somewhere I did not expect, somewhere further back than any surname in my tree. So my dad and I were on a call, and he drops the word jacket. So if you didn't grow up around Jamaican aunties, here's the translation. A jacket is a child a man is raising and calling his own, while somewhere in the yard, someone knows or at least suspects otherwise. So mama's baby, daddy's maybe. It's said with a laugh most times, but underneath that laugh is a whole system. And I want to be clear, it's not just one person managing one secret. It's entire families quietly protecting children, land, reputations, and sometimes all three at once. I bring this up because it's impossible to keep going through these St. Elizabeth records without running into some version of that same instinct. And I'm not saying I found an actual jacket in my tree. I can't prove that, and I'm not going to guess. But I found the same quiet editing of the official story, the same protection of peace, land, and the name. Here's what I kept finding. Baptism after baptism through to the 1840s, a child gets presented at the church and the parents' names are just gone. Blank boxes where two full names should be. At first I thought, okay, this is carelessness, a tired clerk, a torn page, a bad copy. Sometimes that's exactly what it was. But it turns out this wasn't unique to my family at all. Before 1850, this was standard parish practice, full stop, across Jamaica. If a child is born out of wedlock, the church did not write the parents' names down. It wasn't an accident, it was the rule. A minister could look at a couple who'd lived together for years, who everyone knows in the district as a pair, and if there'd been no church wedding, he'd leave that column empty on principle. And once I understood it was the rule and not the exception, I started seeing that pattern everywhere across the Newman, Blake, and Alexander lines specifically. Couples who'd lived together for decades, raised children, stood by each other till the very end, and never once had a Church of England wedding to show for it. Everybody in the district knew who the parents were. It was about not writing it down where God and the parish could see it. It's a strange kind of erasure, not erasing that a child existed, erasing exactly who made them on paper, while everybody around them kept living the truth out loud. The other thing that kept surprising me, how much race itself bent depending on money and generations, not blood. So somewhere back in this tree, a man born mixed race, grandson of a white settler and a free woman of color, ends up on a document decades later listed simply as white or musty, which means legally white. And this isn't because his ancestry changed. It's because enough generations and enough land had passed that the law let him cross over. Colonial Jamaica actually had a measure for this, a fraction of ancestry that had to separate you from an enslaved great-grandmother before you could legally be reclassified. It sounds like a nightmare bureaucracy. And it was. Meanwhile, a woman standing beside him from a family just as free, just as propertied, stays recorded as a woman of color her entire life. Same class, same land, different ledger entry. The difference wasn't truth, it was distance from blackness measured out like a formula. And whoever landed closer to white on paper kept more of the legal protections, more of the inheritance rights. So when I see a blank baptism column or a race left unrecorded or an occupation dressed up as planter with no mention of a mother at all, I don't read that as an accident anymore. I read it as a family doing the math in real time on what could be said out loud and what had to stay quiet to keep the money and the land inside the family. And as I go through these records, I keep seeing these words sitting beside names: mulatto, quadroon, black, colored. Sometimes the label shifts for the same family from one generation to the next. So what I'm understanding is that blackness itself was never just a fact of ancestry here. It was also a measure of social class, of money, of who you were connected to and how far removed you'd become on paper from an enslaved grandmother. Social class, inherited straight from the British, was doing the actual work of dictating race. Now, here's the thread that took me somewhere I didn't expect at all. Before the Blakes, before the Newmans, before a single English surname touched these hills, this land in southern St. Elizabeth, the Santa Cruz Range, and the Pedro Plains below it belonged to the Taino. We were taught in school that the Taino people were wiped out not long after the Spanish arrived. The history on the ground in St. Elizabeth does not sit easily with that story. Cave sites, midden sites, oral histories still there in that dry, rigid county between Malvern and the Plains. When the British took the island from the Spanish, surviving Taino did not just vanish. Many fled into the rugged interior and over time intermarried with escaped African laborers, forming some of the earliest free mountain communities. And there's a second thread here too, a separate one. The British wanted scouts who knew rough terrain, so they brought Mosquito people over from the coast of Central America to help track down the Leeward Maroons. In exchange for that service, some of those men were granted land in the exact same southern parishes where my family's names show up a century later. The Pedro Plains, the foothills below Malvern, the borderlands towards the Great Morass. To get from the Blake and Newman coffee walks down to the shipping ports at Black River, a person had to travel straight through that ground. Now, I don't have proof of a Taino or Mosquito grandmother in my direct line, and I'm not going to pretend a DNA trace result will settle something a paper trail can't. But the geography makes it plausible. And this region carries physical and cultural markers, complexion, hair texture, shape of a face, that people there have talked about for generations as something older than the transatlantic story alone. A reddish or olive skin tone, some color elders still call the St. Elizabeth glow. Straight, heavy black hair that predates any East Indian migration by 100 years. It's not proof, but it's not nothing either. And there's one more layer to this land question I'm sitting with, but I want to be upfront about it because I don't have it fully confirmed. There's a version of this story where the Alexander family, one of the free-colored families I keep running into on this ridge, was here before the Blakes, before the Newmans, before the Whites. Possibly a mix of Black, Taino, and maybe some white ancestry going back further than anyone else on this land. Again, I can't prove it yet. It's a question I'm still chasing, not an answer that I've landed on. I started this whole project trying to find out where my people came from. But I'm finding instead a family constantly negotiating who they were on paper versus who they were in the yard. A jacket here, a blank column there, a man reclassified as white generations after his own grandmother was labeled otherwise. None of this is dishonest, not really. It's survival, dressed up as paperwork. And I felt that Taino thread enough, even without a paper trail to confirm it, that I recently got a small tattoo to carry it with me. It's a symbol tied to creativity and continuous energy, two things that have always guided me. I put it on my foot, which, for the record, hurt way more than I expected. But it felt right there. My feet carry me forward. They keep me grounded at the same time. It's a quiet way of honoring the roots I'm still tracing and the ancestors I may never fully document on paper, but I can still choose to carry with me. I want to actually walk the ground where the Newmans, Blakes, and Alexander boundaries all touched and see what's still standing there. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe. There's 6 more episodes before this one, and we're just getting started. And if you've got your own jacket story or a blank column in your own family tree, drop it in the comments. I read every single one. See you next time.